Why did my children stop laughing when the holiday jokes ended and the room went quiet? They thought I was a harmless relic from another time, smiling along because I had no choice. What they didn't understand was that I had already decided this would be the last table where they spoke that freely. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey and expensive wine. 23 people crowded around 2 tables pushed together, silverware clinking against china, voices layered over each other in that particular chaos of family gatherings. I sat near the end, fork in hand, nodding along to conversations I wasn't part of. Calvin stood at the head of the table, glass raised, telling a story about market disruption. His suit fit perfectly. His watch caught the light. Everyone leaned in when he spoke, the way they used to lean in when I explained how bridges stayed standing or why certain materials failed under stress. That was a long time ago. "Dad still uses a flip phone," Calvin said, grinning. "Can you believe that? In 2025? Laughter rippled through the room. I smiled. It was easier than explaining that I preferred devices that didn't track my location or sell my habits to advertisers. Easier than reminding anyone that I designed navigation systems before smartphones existed. Noah leaned back in his chair, wine glass dangling from his fingers. He also prints directions from MapQuest. I'm not even joking. More laughter. Louder this time. Elena covered her mouth, trying to look apologetic, but her shoulders shook. Marion, my sister, glanced at me from across the table. I gave her a small nod. "Don't worry, I'm fine." "Remember when Dad tried to use Venmo?" Noah continued. "He asked if he needed to mail them a check first." That wasn't true. I'd never said that. But correcting him would make it worse, make me look defensive, make me the punchline all over again. So I chuckled along, lifted my water glass, played my part. Calvin raised his voice slightly, the way people do when they want everyone to hear. "It's wild, right? The guy who designed half the mechanical systems in the Grayson Tower can't figure out how to update his phone." "Different era," someone said from the other end of the table. "Different skill set." "Exactly," Noah agreed. "Dad's from the analog age. We're digital natives." The phrase hung in the air. Analog age. Like I was a museum piece. Like everything I knew had expired the moment touchscreens became ubiquitous. I watched Calvin's fiancée tap something into her phone, watched 3 other guests do the same. Recording this, sharing this, turning this moment into content. Victor Lane sat 2 seats down, his expression carefully neutral. He'd managed my financial portfolio for 18 years. He knew exactly how much of Calvin's self-made success had been built on loans I'd co-signed, investments I'd seeded, connections I'd facilitated. But Victor didn't speak. This wasn't his table to defend. The jokes continued. Someone mentioned my reading glasses. Someone else brought up my preference for paper files. Each comment landed like a stone in still water, ripples of amusement spreading outward. I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept my hands steady on the table. Then Calvin said it. "Honestly, we're lucky Dad's so easygoing. Can you imagine if he actually tried to keep up? It'd be exhausting for everyone." The room went quiet for just a second, just long enough for that sentence to settle. Long enough for me to understand that this wasn't affectionate teasing anymore. This was something else. This was them deciding, collectively, that I no longer mattered enough to take seriously. I looked around the table. Not one person met my eyes. Not Marion, who'd called me crying when her husband left. Not Elena, whose graduate school I'd paid for in full. Not the colleagues who'd attended my retirement party 3 months ago and called me indispensable. No one expected me to respond. No one thought I had anything to say worth hearing. I set my fork down carefully, precisely, and smiled wider. The house was silent by the time I finished cleaning. Marion had offered to help, but I'd waved her off. I preferred working alone, preferred the rhythm of stacking plates and wiping surfaces, the mechanical simplicity of making things orderly again. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands in warm, soapy water, watching the window's reflection. The man looking back at me had gray hair and reading glasses and the kind of face people glanced past in grocery stores. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Safe. That was fine. I'd never needed to be memorable. I dried my hands and walked to the garage, flipping the light switch. The workshop stretched before me, clean and organized, tools hanging on pegboards, drawers labeled in my own handwriting. This was where I thought clearly. This was where problems became solvable. I sat at the workbench and opened my laptop, not the newest model, but functional, fast enough, secure enough. I navigated to a folder I hadn't opened in 6 years, a collection of files I'd labeled contingency documentation, insurance policies, patent registrations, employment records, loan agreements, just in case, I'd told myself when I created it, just in case respect ever became optional. I scrolled through the files slowly, methodically, letting the information settle. Design patents filed under my name, authorship certificates for 3 major infrastructure projects, letters from the company's legal department confirming my intellectual contributions, co-signed loans for both sons, balloon payments still outstanding, financial guarantees I'd provided for Elena's business, personally backed. They thought I was analog, outdated, behind the times. They forgot that analog systems kept meticulous records. I leaned back in my chair and thought about the past 8 years. Not with anger, with clarity. I thought about the faculty meetings where Elena stopped introducing me as her father and started calling me a family friend. I thought about Calvin's wedding where I wasn't asked to make a toast but was expected to cover the venue deposit. I thought about Noah's startup launch party where I was seated with the caterers. Small things, incremental things, the kind of shifts that happen so gradually you don't notice until you're standing in a room full of people who've forgotten you built the floor they're standing on. At work, it had been the same. Younger project managers talking over me in meetings, my suggestions rephrased by someone else and suddenly taken seriously, the consulting contracts that stopped coming, the office relocations that left me in progressively smaller spaces, farther from decision-making centers. I'd been made invisible in careful, plausible increments, but invisible didn't mean gone, it meant overlooked, and overlooked people saw everything. I opened my email and searched for a name I hadn't contacted in 3 years, Ruth Bell, HR compliance consultant. We'd worked together on a documentation audit after the company merger, a tedious project that required absolute precision. She'd appreciated my attention to detail. She'd said so in writing. I drafted a message, short, professional, a simple request for clarification on employment contribution records and intellectual property rights. I mentioned I was updating personal files for estate planning purposes. Nothing alarming, nothing urgent. I hit send and closed the laptop. The garage was quiet, cold. I could hear the furnace clicking on in the basement, the house settling around me. I thought about Calvin's voice at dinner. We're lucky Dad's so easygoing. They were right. I was easygoing. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I didn't make scenes. I just made decisions. I stood and turned off the workshop light, walking back through the dark house to my bedroom. Tomorrow I had a meeting at the bank. A routine check-in Victor had scheduled months ago. Nothing unusual. But I was going to ask some very specific questions. The parking lot at the office stretched gray and empty under November clouds. I arrived 20 minutes early, the way I always did, parking in the same spot I'd used for 16 years. Muscle memory, routine. I gathered my briefcase and walked toward the building, but stopped when I heard voices near the side entrance. Calvin and Noah. I hadn't known they were meeting here today. I stepped behind a concrete pillar, not hiding exactly, just observing. He's not going to notice, Noah was saying. He barely checks his email. I know, Calvin replied. But we should move the timeline up anyway, get everything formalized before he starts asking questions. You think he will? Dad? No. He's checked out. He's been checked out for years. Their footsteps echoed on the pavement. I pressed my back against the pillar, briefcase handle slick in my palm. It's better this way, Calvin continued. He can just coast. Be the background support. We'll handle the actual decisions. Background support. The phrase settled into my chest like a stone. They disappeared into the building. I waited 30 seconds, then followed, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. My office was on the 3rd floor, a small room with one window and a desk that faced the wall. It used to overlook the courtyard. That was before the reorganization. I set my briefcase down and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a file folder I'd assembled over the past week. Ruth Bell had responded to my email within 4 hours. Professional, thorough, exactly what I'd expected. She'd attached a summary of my documented contributions to 14 major projects, including authorship confirmations and patent co-registrations. I read through the pages again, even though I'd memorized them. The Grayson Tower structural supports, the Harbor Bridge expansion joints, the municipal water system overhaul. My name was on all of them. My designs, my calculations, my solutions to problems other engineers had called unsolvable. But at family dinners, I was the guy who couldn't figure out Venmo. I pulled up my calendar and scrolled back 6 years. There it was, a reminder I'd set and then forgotten, buried under hundreds of other appointments. Review guarantee structures, personal liability check. I'd known even then that lending my name had risks. I'd done it anyway. Because they were my children. Because I'd believed family meant something more than balance sheets and leverage. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the bank's online portal. Victor had helped me set up several financial structures over the years, protective mechanisms for estate planning and risk management. I'd signed the documents without reading every detail. I'd trusted him. But trust was a funny thing. It required maintenance. It required reciprocity. I clicked through the account summaries, drilling down into the authorization hierarchies. Calvin's business loan, Noah's startup funding, Elena's commercial lease guarantee, all of them structured with my signature as the primary guarantor, all of them giving me certain rights, certain controls, rights I'd never exercised, until now. I made a list, quietly, methodically, no emotion, just data points and decision trees. I wrote down names of people who owed me professional favors. I noted upcoming contract renewals. I reviewed every financial exposure point where my withdrawal would create immediate consequences. Then I made a phone call. Victor answered on the second ring. Jared, good timing. I was just reviewing your portfolio. I need to schedule a meeting, I said. In person, this week if possible. A pause. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I just want to clarify some structural details. Risk assessment, routine maintenance. Another pause. Longer. Of course. Thursday work for you? Thursday's perfect. I hung up and looked at the papers spread across my desk. Not a plan, not yet. Just information, just clarity. The door to my office opened. One of the younger project managers, Tyler something, poked his head in. Oh, didn't realize anyone was here. I'm here most days, I said mildly. Right, yeah. He glanced at my desk, at the files, then back at me. Anyway, we're doing a team sync in Conference B if you want to join. I'll pass, thanks though. He shrugged and left. The door clicked shut. I gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder, locked the drawer, and stood. The window showed the courtyard below, people moving between buildings, purpose in every step. I used to be down there, central, necessary. Now I was up here, quiet, forgotten, but forgotten meant underestimated, and underestimated meant free. Ruth Bell's office smelled like coffee and printer toner. She sat across from me, reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing the documents I'd requested. "This is very thorough," she said finally. "You've documented everything. I learned early to keep records." She smiled slightly. "Most people don't. They assume institutional memory will protect them. It doesn't." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." She slid a folder across the desk. "These are certified copies of your employment contribution records, patent co-registrations, and project authorship confirmations. Everything's time-stamped and verified through corporate legal. If anyone questions your intellectual property rights or project ownership, this documentation is definitive." I opened the folder and scanned the first page. My name appeared 17 times in the first document alone. Design specifications, safety calculations, material innovations, solutions that had saved the company millions in liability exposure and construction delays. "Can I ask what this is for?" Ruth said carefully. "Estate planning doesn't usually require this level of detail." "I'm clarifying my professional legacy," I said, "making sure credit is assigned correctly." She studied me for a long moment. "Has someone been misrepresenting your contributions?" "Let's say I've noticed some discrepancies in how certain achievements are being attributed." She nodded slowly. "Discrepancies have a way of becoming permanent if they're not addressed." "Exactly." She closed her laptop and leaned back. "I'll be honest, Jared. I've seen this before. Senior employees phased out quietly, their work claimed by people who happened to be in the room when decisions were made public. It's not illegal, but it's not right either." "I'm not interested in making accusations," I said. "I'm interested in establishing facts." "Then you have what you need." She tapped the folder. "These documents are legally binding. They establish ownership, authorship, and intellectual contribution beyond dispute. If you need institutional support to enforce that reality, let me know." I stood and shook her hand. "I appreciate your help." "Anytime. And Jared?" She smiled. "I remember the water system project. You saved 17 lives with that pressure valve redesign. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I walked out of her office with the folder under my arm, feeling something settle into place. Not anger, not vindication, just clarity. The bank meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the lobby, watching people move through the space with the confidence of those who believed their money was protected. Their futures were secure. Their plans were solid. Victor appeared at precisely 2, handshake firm, smile professional. "Jared, good to see you." We walked to a private conference room. He closed the door and opened his tablet. I pulled all the relevant account summaries. Everything looks stable. Your retirement distributions are on schedule, and the market's been kind to your portfolio. "I want to talk about the guarantee structures," I said. His fingers paused over the screen. "The guarantees? The ones I provided for Calvin, Noah, and Elena. I'd like to review the terms." "Of course." He swiped through several screens. "You co-signed Calvin's business acquisition loan in 2021, 52% personal liability. You backed Noah's startup funding in 2023, full guarantee on the initial capital round, and you guaranteed Elena's commercial lease and equipment financing last year. What happens if I withdraw those guarantees?" Victor looked up sharply. "Withdraw them?" "Yes. What are the procedural steps?" He set the tablet down carefully. "Jared, if you withdraw guarantees on active loans and leases, the lenders will require immediate restructuring. Your children would need to provide alternative collateral or pay down significant portions of the outstanding balances. In some cases, they might need to refinance entirely. How much time would they have? Typically 30 to 90 days, depending on the contract language." I nodded. "And if they can't restructure in time?" Victor's expression shifted. Not quite alarm, not quite understanding, somewhere in between. "Then the lenders would have the right to call the loans, demand immediate payment, seize collateral. But it's all legal?" Me withdrawing my guarantees? Completely legal. They're your guarantees. You have the right to revoke them with proper notice. He leaned forward. But Jared, this would create serious financial pressure for your children. Is there a problem I should know about? No problem, I said. I'm just reviewing my risk exposure, estate planning, liability management. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his face, but he was too professional to push. If you decide to proceed, I'll need written authorization, and I'd recommend scheduling a family meeting to discuss the implications. I'll let you know, I said. We shook hands again. I walked out of the bank into the cold afternoon air, hands in my pockets, breath visible in the November chill. At home, I sat in my office and organized the documents Ruth and Victor had provided. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Procedural Corrections. I made a list of phone calls I'd need to make, meetings I'd need to schedule, authorizations I'd need to sign, not revenge, not punishment, just a correction of the record. My phone buzzed, a group text from the family chat. Calvin had sent a photo of the holiday dinner table, everyone laughing, glasses raised. The caption read, "Best night of the year. Family is everything." I was in the photo, smiling at the edge of the frame, barely visible behind someone's shoulder. I typed a thumbs-up emoji and hit send. Then I opened my calendar and marked a date 3 weeks away. Public holiday luncheon. Calvin had organized it. Mandatory attendance requested. All family members expected. Perfect. The backyard was frozen solid, grass crunching under my shoes. I walked the perimeter, hands in my coat pockets, watching my breath cloud in the morning air. Inside the house, my phone sat on the kitchen counter, group chat messages stacking up. Plans for the luncheon, venue details, dress code suggestions. I'd responded to exactly 3 messages in 2 weeks. Short answers, confirmations. The kind of replies that said I was listening without actually engaging. Noah had joked yesterday about me finally showing up to something important. Elena had sent a laughing emoji. Calvin had responded with a gif of an old man shuffling slowly. I'd sent another thumbs up. In my office, the folder marked Procedural Corrections had grown thicker. Ruth had provided additional documentation at my request. Employment timelines, contribution verification letters, patent office confirmations, everything time-stamped, certified, legally unassailable. Victor had sent the guarantee withdrawal paperwork, standard forms, simple language. I just needed to sign and file. I hadn't signed yet, not because I was uncertain, because timing mattered. Precision mattered. When you spent 40 years designing systems that couldn't fail, you learned that sequence determined outcome. One step out of order, and the entire structure collapsed. I walked back inside and made coffee, watching the machine drip dark liquid into the pot. Mechanical, predictable, reliable. The same process every morning, the same result. There was comfort in that. Systems you could trust because they followed rules that never changed. My phone buzzed again. Marion. "You okay?" Her text read. "Fine," I typed back. "You've been quiet." "Just busy." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Call me if you need to talk." I set the phone down and poured coffee into a plain white mug. Marion had always been perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. She'd noticed something at the holiday dinner, seen something in my face that made her uneasy. But she hadn't asked directly, hadn't pushed. That was fine. There was nothing to tell her yet, nothing concrete, just preparations, just procedures. I sat at my desk and reviewed the luncheon invitation one more time. Public venue, neutral ground, witnesses. Calvin had chosen well, probably without realizing why. He wanted a big audience, wanted to celebrate family success in front of colleagues and friends. He wanted people to see how far they'd come, how much they'd accomplished. He'd get his audience. I opened my laptop and drafted 3 emails. The first to Ruth, confirming my attendance at a pre-scheduled HR meeting the morning of the luncheon. The second to Victor, requesting he join us at the venue to discuss time-sensitive financial matters. The third to the luncheon venue coordinator, asking about the availability of a small conference room adjacent to the main dining area. Professional, procedural, nothing alarming. The kind of requests that raised no flags, triggered no concerns, just logistics, just planning. I sent all three and closed the laptop. The rest of the week passed in careful routine. I went to work. I answered emails. I attended meetings where people talked past me and made decisions I used to make. I smiled. I nodded. I took notes. I watched younger colleagues present ideas that echoed concepts I'd proposed months earlier. Watched them receive praise and recognition while I sat in the back of the room, invisible as always. And every evening, I came home and reviewed the documentation one more time, checking for gaps, verifying details, making sure every procedural step was airtight. I cross-referenced dates. I confirmed signatures. I verified institutional stamps and legal certifications. Nothing could be left to chance. Nothing could be disputed. Thursday night, the group chat exploded with activity. Calvin had finalized the luncheon program, speeches planned, toasts scheduled, a slideshow prepared highlighting family milestones and successes. "Dad, you'll love this," Noah had written. "We put together some great throwback photos." I imagined what those photos would show. Me in the background, me on the sidelines, me fading progressively into irrelevance while they moved forward, confident and bright and certain of their own brilliance. Each image a testament to how thoroughly I'd been erased from my own story. I typed, looking forward to it. The responses came quickly. Heart emojis from Elena. A thumbs up from Noah. Calvin sent a message saying he was glad I'd be there, that it meant a lot to have the whole family together. I stared at that message for a long time. The whole family. As if I'd ever been anything more than furniture in their narrative. As if my presence had ever mattered beyond the financial scaffolding I'd provided. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the neighborhood was dark except for porch lights and the occasional car passing. Normal people living normal lives. People who probably took their families for granted in small ways, but never completely erased each other. I wondered what they'd think of what I was about to do. Whether they'd call it justice or cruelty. Whether they'd understand that sometimes correction was the only path left when every other option had been exhausted. Friday morning, I dressed carefully. Not my best suit, that would seem unusual. Just clean slacks, a pressed shirt, a tie that didn't call attention. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what I expected. A man people glanced past. A man who blended into rooms and disappeared from memory. Perfect. I drove to the venue early, arriving 90 minutes before the scheduled start time. The coordinator met me in the lobby, a young woman with a clipboard and an efficient smile. "Mr. Trasker, we have the conference room ready as requested." "Thank you, I'll need about 30 minutes to set up." "Of course. Let me know if you need anything else." She led me to a small room off the main dining area. Windows overlooked the space where tables were being arranged, where my family would soon gather expecting celebration and validation and continued certainty. I could see workers setting up chairs, adjusting place settings, testing the microphone system. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked ready for a party. I set my briefcase on the conference table and began unpacking. Documents in neat stacks, files organized by category, everything labeled, everything precise, patent registrations on the left, employment records in the center, financial guarantees on the right, each stack representing a different pillar of the foundation they'd built their lives on without ever acknowledging who'd laid it. Ruth arrived at 10:30, professional and calm. She set her own briefcase down and looked at the arranged documents. "You're sure about this?" "Completely. Once we start, there's no walking it back. Institutional processes don't reverse easily." "I understand." She nodded and sat down, opening her own folder. Then let's review the sequence one more time. We spent 20 minutes going through each step. Who would speak first? What questions would be asked? How documentation would be presented? What institutional authority supported each claim? She showed me the official HR stamps on certain documents, explained the legal weight of patent registrations, outlined the contractual obligations that gave me the right to withdraw guarantees. No drama, no confrontation, just facts, delivered clearly, with proper procedural backing. They'll try to negotiate, Ruth said. They'll ask for time, for reconsideration, for compromise. I know. What will you say? Nothing. The documentation speaks for itself. She smiled slightly. Good. Don't let emotion cloud procedure. That's when mistakes happen. Victor arrived at 11 looking concerned, his usual professional composure slightly cracked. Jared, what's this about? Your message said urgent. Sit down, Victor. We'll explain everything shortly. He sat, glancing between me and Ruth, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. I could see him running calculations in his head, trying to anticipate what kind of financial matter would require this level of formality. By 11:15, the main dining area was filling with people. I watched through the conference room window as my children arrived, smiling, greeting guests, moving through the space like they owned it. Calvin, in his expensive suit, working the room with practiced ease. Noah making people laugh, that performative charm he'd perfected. Elena, graceful and poised, accepting compliments with modest smiles. They thought they did own it. Own the room. Own the narrative. Own the future. They were about to learn differently. Ruth checked her watch. 15 minutes. I straightened my tie and picked up the first document folder. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. 40 years of designing systems that couldn't fail had taught me one critical lesson. When you've done the math correctly, when every calculation is verified, when every structural element is properly placed, you don't need to be nervous. You just need to let physics do its work. Let's go! The dining room hummed with conversation, glasses clinking, people finding their seats. Calvin stood at the front near a projector screen, adjusting his microphone, checking the slideshow one last time. Noah worked the room, shaking hands, making people laugh. Elena stood near the windows, elegant and composed, exactly the kind of daughter people complimented at gatherings like this. I took my assigned seat near the back. Not surprising, not unexpected. Marion appeared beside me, touching my shoulder. You sure you're okay? Never better. She didn't look convinced, but she sat down anyway, 2 chairs over. Victor took the seat on my other side, still looking uncertain about why he'd been summoned. Calvin tapped the microphone. All right, everyone, let's get started. Thank you all for being here. This is a special day for our family, and we wanted to share it with the people who matter most. Applause rippled through the room, warm, supportive. Exactly what Calvin had wanted. Before we eat, I thought we'd take a few minutes to reflect on how we got here. Family legacy, shared success, the foundation that made everything possible. The lights dimmed, the slideshow began, photos of holidays, graduations, business launches, each image accompanied by narration, highlighting achievements, milestones, victories. I appeared in 7 photos total, always in the background, always slightly out of focus. Calvin's voice filled the room. Our family has always believed in supporting each other, building together, creating opportunities. And today, we're celebrating the next chapter of that story. He clicked to a new slide. A business logo. A partnership announcement. Something Calvin and Noah had been working on together, a venture they'd mentioned in passing but never explained. This wouldn't have been possible without the foundation Dad helped create, Calvin said, gesturing toward me. His generation taught us the value of hard work and stability, and now we're taking those lessons and building something bigger. Polite applause. A few people glanced back at me. I nodded, smiled slightly. Calvin continued. Dad's always been our rock. Steady, reliable. The kind of guy who just shows up and does his part without needing recognition. More applause. Warmer now. People appreciated the sentiment, the tribute to the quiet father who'd enabled success without demanding attention. Noah stood, raising his glass. To Dad, the original infrastructure guy. Laughter. Glasses raised. Someone shouted, "Hear, hear." I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, watching them celebrate a version of me they'd invented. The harmless relic, the analog dinosaur, the background support. The slideshow ended. The lights came up. Servers began moving between tables with appetizers. The room relaxed into conversation and celebration. I could hear fragments of discussion around me, business deals, market opportunities, future plans, all built on foundations they didn't even know existed. Calvin walked over, hand extended, his smile wide and confident. "Thanks for being here, Dad. This means a lot." I shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the certainty in his touch. "Can I have a word with you? And Noah and Elena, in private." His smile faltered slightly. "Right now?" "Just 5 minutes, the conference room next door." He glanced at Noah, who shrugged. Elena walked over, curious, her champagne glass still half full. "What's going on?" "Family business," I said. "Won't take long." Calvin's expression shifted, professional mask sliding into place. "Sure. Lead the way." I stood and walked toward the conference room, hearing their footsteps behind me. Marion started to follow, but I caught her eye and shook my head gently. She stopped, confused but obedient, watching me with that expression that said she knew something was about to change. Inside the conference room, Ruth and Victor were already seated. The documents were arranged on the table in precise stacks, organized by category, each folder labeled, each page numbered. Calvin stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" "Sit down," I said quietly. They exchanged glances but complied. 3 chairs on one side of the table, me on the other, flanked by Ruth and Victor. The geometry of the room had changed. They were no longer looking down at me. We were eye level now. "I asked you here to correct some misunderstandings," I began. "About family legacy, about foundation, about who built what." Noah leaned back, arms crossed. "Dad, if this is about the slideshow..." "It's not about the slideshow." I opened the first folder. "It's about authorship." Ruth leaned forward. "I'm Ruth Bell, HR compliance consultant. I've worked with your father for 16 years documenting his professional contributions. The materials in front of you represent certified employment records, patent registrations, and project authorship confirmations." Calvin's face had gone very still. "I don't understand." "The Grayson Tower," I said, sliding the first document across the table. "Structural support systems, design specifications filed under my name, patent co-registration confirmed by corporate legal." Elena picked up the paper, scanning it, her eyes moving faster as comprehension dawned. "We never said you didn't work on this. You said I was from another era. You said my skills were outdated. You celebrated building on a foundation I helped create, but you forgot who actually created it." "That's not fair," Noah said. "We acknowledged you. You acknowledged a version of me that was convenient. The quiet guy who shows up and does his part. Background support." I slid another document across. "Harbor Bridge expansion joints, municipal water system overhaul, 14 major infrastructure projects over 32 years, my name, my designs, my solutions." I pushed more documents forward, watching them land on the polished table surface. Each one a piece of truth they'd never bothered to verify, each one proving that the foundation they stood on had a very specific architect. Victor cleared his throat. "I've also been asked to review certain financial structures your father established on your behalf." Calvin's eyes snapped to Victor. "What financial structures?" "The guarantee agreements," Victor said, opening his own folder with practiced precision. Your business acquisition loan, Calvin. 52% personally guaranteed by your father. Noah's startup funding, fully backed by Jared's personal assets. Elena's commercial lease and equipment financing, guaranteed by your father's credit and collateral. The room went very quiet. I could hear the muffled celebration continuing in the dining room beyond the walls. Laughter and conversation. People who had no idea that reality was being rewritten in this small space. I'm exercising my right to withdraw those guarantees, I said, effective immediately. You'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. Your lenders will require restructuring within 60 days. Elena's hands were shaking, the paper trembling between her fingers. You can't do that. I can, I said. They're my guarantees, my liability, my risk, and I'm removing them. This will destroy everything we've built, Calvin said, voice tight, controlled fury building behind his words. No, I corrected, leaning forward slightly. This will require you to build it yourselves, without using my name, without using my credit, without pretending I'm just the harmless old guy who doesn't understand how the modern world works. Ruth slid another document forward. These are institutional confirmations of your father's intellectual property rights and professional contributions. If anyone attempts to claim credit for his work, or misrepresent his involvement in any project, these documents provide definitive legal standing. Noah stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're punishing us for what? Some jokes at dinner? I'm correcting the record, I said, my voice calm, measured. You wanted to celebrate family legacy. This is the legacy, mine, not yours, not yet. Calvin's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working. And if we can't restructure the loans? Then you'll learn what it feels like when foundation collapses, I said. When the systems you took for granted stop supporting you. When the quiet competence you dismissed becomes very loud absence. Elena was crying now, but silently, tears tracking down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. Noah stood frozen, comprehension finally settling in like ice water. Calvin stared at the documents spread across the table like evidence at a trial he hadn't known he was attending. I stood slowly, deliberately, picking up my briefcase. The luncheon will continue. You'll go back out there and smile and celebrate. And in 60 days you'll discover whether you can actually stand on your own or if you've been borrowing credibility this entire time. Ruth and Victor gathered their materials with quiet efficiency. The sound of papers sliding into folders was loud in the silence. Wait, Calvin said, his voice cracking slightly. We can fix this. We can apologize. This isn't about apologies, I said, cutting him off. This is about reality. You've spent years deciding I don't matter. Now you get to test that hypothesis. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back at 3 faces I'd known their entire lives. Faces that suddenly looked younger, more uncertain, stripped of the confidence they'd worn like armor. When you're sitting in your lender's offices trying to explain why your guarantor withdrew support, remember something. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need credit. I just needed respect. You couldn't even manage that. The words hung in the air between us. Final. Irreversible. I opened the door and walked out, leaving them sitting in that small room with documents that redrew every map they thought they'd memorized. Marion was waiting in the hallway, her face pale. Jared, what happened? Clarity, I said. I walked back into the dining room. People were eating, talking, celebrating. Someone asked me if everything was all right. I smiled and said everything was perfect. I sat at my table, picked up my fork, and took a bite of food. The taste was ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what it should be. Behind me, the conference room door remained closed. Inside, 3 people were learning that certainty has a price. That foundation doesn't appear by accident. That quiet doesn't mean powerless. I set my fork down and looked around the room. All these people celebrating success they thought they understood. None of them knowing that the most important conversation was happening in silence, behind a closed door, in a small room where assumptions were collapsing under the weight of documentation. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The ice clinked against the sides, cold, clear, precise, exactly like the truth they'd spent years avoiding.